The Valyrian Peninsula will always be shrouded in mystery simply because that's the way George Martin wants this part of the story to unfold. So many aspects of this location is speculation by various characters from the past and present, so it's up to us to interpret it in any way we see fit. The people and all their history are gone. Not only did the entire place blow up after the volcanic cataclysm, but any character who tries to check out what's left never returns alive. 400 years back, before the peninsula was split into pieces, and the waters surrounding the newly made islands were boiling, Valyria was the greatest civilization in this world, and it's all thanks to dragons. The Valyrians claim that all dragons originate here, however, some believe otherwise. The Valyrians told stories of how they started as humble sheep herders, before ever making contact with dragons, deep within their volcanoes called the 14 Flames. 14 active volcanoes that surrounded the peninsula. As funny as it would be to put sheep on the list, I obviously can't do that. After the discovery of all the dragons and their eggs layering in the 14 Flames, they ditched their old jobs of taming sheep and focused their efforts on taming dragons. The dragons inhabit this location specifically for its climate. It's super hot here, and even hotter within the volcanoes, just how they like it. They could have gone up and flown anywhere, but chose to remain here. Though some skeletons can be found in random locations throughout the world, so just because they're heavily associated with Valyria, they may not be unique to the location, even though it does seem that way. The Valyrians figured out the way to tame these powerful beasts were with blood magic. This is why even the Dragon Lord's descendants can ride atop of one, while others can't. But one of the scholars in the story suggests that the Valyrians may have actually created the dragons through genetic mutations and breeding. This honestly isn't out of the question, because it is something they dabbled in later on in the story. There are two creatures in this world that very closely resemble dragons that the Valyrians could have experimented with. Wyverns and fireworms are really the only fantastical creatures known to exist that kind of fall into the same class as dragons. I should talk about the Valyrians' obsession with interbreeding different species though. They practice blood magic and other dark arts as well, delving deep into the earth for secrets best left buried, and twisting the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras. Enslaving the people they just conquered with their dragons wasn't enough for the Valyrians. It was never enough for them. Instead of conducting their mutant experiments on their mining slaves or their slave army, they chose the worst criminals for this one. They also took their work to a different location, where they formed something called the Flesh Pits. It was on an island just southeast of Valyria. Founded by the old empire of Geese, it was known as Gorgei for close on 2 centuries, or perhaps 4, there is some dispute, until the Dragon Lords of Valyria captured it during the Third Giscari War and renamed it Gogossos. By any name, it was an evil place. The Dragon Lords sent their worst criminals to the Isle of Tears to live out their lives in hard labor. In the dungeons of Gogossos, torturers devised new torments. In the flesh pits, blood sorcery of the darkest sort was practiced, as beasts were mated to slave women to bring forth twisted, half-human children. Why they were creating chimeras isn't explicitly stated, but it isn't all that different than what Hitler and his Nazis were doing in our real world, conducting sick and inhuman experiments to further their knowledge. Maybe the Valyrians thought they could have another breakthrough, like dragons part of their army, so they could have taken over the world even faster. I personally believe that dragons just existed within the 14 Flames, and are not a product of crossbreeding or magical experiments. Wyverns are just like dragons, except for the fact that they can't breathe fire. This still makes them pretty terrifying, but Valyrians can never conquer the world without that firepower. Unlike dragons, wyverns come in a variety of sizes, from the size of a monkey to a massive beast. Dragons, on the other hand, never stop growing, as long as they're free from captivity and are able to feed as much as they like. Wyverns didn't go exist with the doom of Valyria, because they're predominantly found in Sothurios, the southernmost continent on this map, with them having the exact likeness to a dragon, and being suggested that Valyrians created dragons from wyverns. I think it's safe to assume they also inhabited this location. The next creature that resembles a dragon is definitely unique to this part of the world. They're called fireworms, a very deadly beast also found in the 14 Flames, and these guys also spit fire at their prey. This included the poor miners the Valyrians had been enslaving to gather valuable ores from deep within the volcanoes. If the fireworms got to the slaves before the hazardous environment did them in, nothing but charred corpses would be left. These creatures were able to bore through the ground and stone instead of being able to fly. Just imagine digging away in a dark and poorly lit mine when you accidentally come across the lair of a giant fire-breathing lizard centipede monster. No hope for you there. We'll never know if they survived the doom, but with them all living inside the 14 flames, it's very unlikely. Even dragons with their tough scales were brought down out of the sky during the eruptions. What is hinted in the lore book Fire and Blood that recently came out is that horrors that cannot be imagined live there now, post-doom. We get an up-close look at one of these horrors in the same book. A 12-year-old Targaryen princess thought it would be a good idea to try and tame the family's largest dragon as a way to rebel against her mother. Balerion the Black Dread lived for 200 years, making it the only known being to know Valyria before the Doom took it. Arya and her new dangerous bonded beast disappeared without a trace. It would take over a year for the runaway princess to return to the Seven Kingdoms. The girl's condition was horrible. Her dragon's condition was only a little bit better. It's believed Arya was able to ride on Balerion without him throwing her off his back, but she had no control over where to fly. It's hinted that the dragon decided to return home to Valyria for the first time, since the Targaryen family decided to relocate to Westeros over 150 years prior. It's why no one was able to spot them, and it explained their shocking injuries. Something was able to seriously harm Balerion. There were scars and wounds all over him, with one being 9 feet long and still dripping with hot, smoking blood. To harm Balerion at his peak strength and size to this extent is an insane feat. No wyvern or fireworm could have done this much damage. Something else is living in the ruins of Valyria with claws able to cut through dragon scales. Characters have been claiming demons that prowl the vacant lands. So with no other name for what cut open Balerion, I'll just leave it as that for the list. As for what brought Arya inches from death, that was a much smaller creature, or creatures, I should say. These little guys are less of a mystery, since the men who cared for her witnessed them firsthand. The princess was so thin and her eyes so bloody that she was almost unrecognizable. Arya had an unnaturally hot fever, to the point where smoke was coming out of her. But even stranger, something was moving underneath her skin. The creatures were cooking her alive from inside her own body. She was begging to be put out of her misery, and when she was placed in an ice bath to cool down her burning fever, they all bursted out of her body, killing Arya. They were worms with faces, snakes with hands, twisting, slimy, unspeakable things that seemed to writhe and pulse and squirm as they came bursting from her flesh. Some were no bigger than my little finger, but one at least was as long as my arm. The fire parasites were creatures of heat, so died instantly when being exposed to the ice bath. But this left the men caring for Arya traumatized. Unable to study them, the Septon and Maester only recalled the sounds the creatures made, as if it were something out of a nightmare. Since this incident, adventurers seeking lost treasure in the ruins of Valyria would receive the death penalty in order to avoid the fire parasites getting their hands on another human. We don't know much else about what lived or lives in Valyria, but if you look to Dragonstone, the castle Valyrians built as an outpost in the west, there are some curious gargoyle decorations on the walls. These guys put up 1,000 gargoyles, which is a lot easier to get done if you're architectural masters like the Valyrians. They would use fire magic to do everything. But some of these gargoyles make you second guess if these creatures ever existed in Valyria, because they're not too far off what exists in this fantastical world. Some of the statues depicted cockatrices and griffins. A cockatrice has the body similar to a dragon, but with the head of a rooster. They seriously sound like something flying around the farmlands in Valyria, or something they cooked up in the lab. Cockatrices seem a lot more believable to me than griffins. They just don't match the theme Valyria's going with. Griffins represent power and inflict fear on enemies. I feel like that explains these gargoyle sculptures, more than depicting a real creature. The term Valyrian sphinxes are also thrown around in the books. But again, I feel like they fall under the same category as griffins. Instead, they represent wisdom more than power. Finally, the last creature unique to Valyria are Valyrians themselves. They're clearly written to appear different than your average human race. With hair depicted as gold or silver instead of blonde or white speaks volumes. Purple eyes are pretty distinct too, but that isn't enough to put them in a list about unique creatures. I'm only mentioning them now because of the tales of Valyrians we'd share with each other. They truly believed their people were descended from dragons. They're just too good to be part of the primate family. We even see some of the Targaryens refer to themselves as dragons, like crazy Viserys, and even crazier Aerion, who killed himself drinking wildfire, believing it would transform him into an actual dragon form, years before the story began. Valyrians have a resistance to heat that can be explained by where they hail from. They claim to be immune to sickness and disease, or untroubled by those that inflict common men, which is easily disproven when you look through the causes of death in the Targaryen family. Daenerys and Viserys may believe they can never get sick, but their ancestors in the grave would say otherwise. I'm surprised hellhounds aren't a for sure thing in this location though. The name alone would fit the theme nicely. There's some mention of them in the lore, but unfortunately they're not as cool as they sound, though they are among the gargoyles on Dragonstone, so there is a chance. If you guys want to check out my list breaking down the unique creatures beyond the wall, I'll leave a link to that now on your screen. It's kind of the opposite of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see y'all in a bit. Thanks for watching.